Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life freaking Friday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great. It's a great day to get in one of our most important episodes of the year. That's right, the perfect draft strategy to help all of you hopefully ace your home league drafts, maybe just maybe coming up this weekend. So by we, I mean myself and none other than Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, all-around baller, Dwain, The Rock McFarland. What's up, Dwain?
What's up, Ian? Draft 2 in the books last night. 2 managed leagues. Obviously, we've drafted a lot of best ball, but it's fun getting back into these streets. We got a couple preseason games to talk about. Like football is on my mind all the time. I could hardly sleep after the draft last night.
We've been picking out of 109, then 105, so invite anyone to go check out those episodes as well, or also just the draft boards that Dwain posted over there. That was a fun time there. Very pleased with the 2 teams that we came away with. But plenty of news to get to before we get into some draft strategy. But first, a quick word on Fantasy Life Plus. Fantasy Life Plus, our premium package over here at Fantasy Life, is just a pretty freaking great tool, I believe, to help you, a scholar, hopefully be that much better at fantasy football. From our consensus rankings to projections to Dwayne's utilization tool suite, and personally my favorite, our Draft Champion tool, which allows so many customizable options with mock drafts. Again, just trying to give you guys that extra nudge to potentially take a good fantasy player and put that as fierce. So not trying to break the bank here. It is costing less than a Chipotle burrito per month for our tier 2 package, under $40 per year. So go ahead and guys, check out Fantasy Life Plus. Don't leave home without it. And now some news. All right, Dwayne, 3 big things to get to today. And for most arguable villain, professional vulture, Taysom Hill himself is now a tight end on Yahoo, specifically quarterback / tight end. But let's face it, if you have him on your fantasy squad, you are looking to use him as a tight end. So how does this change the ranks, and how highly do you have to, players who actually play tight end in real life?
Yeah, last year we've got a data partner at True Media, and we use PFF. And I had to build something, Ian, known as the Taysom Hill report, because it's hard to find one place where you can actually see everything that Taysom Hill does. And just to kind of give folks an idea, people talk about him being, a quarterback and, those dropbacks that he gets. I mean, not that many, really. He had 16 dropbacks, 6 completions, 83 passing yards, and a passing touchdown. But the key thing is that he gets a lot of those attempts, Ian, down inside the 5-yard line. That's where they like to put Taysom Hill on the field. And then if you look at him from a rushing perspective, this is where it's just golden. I mean, 81 carries for 401 yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. We've got Kendre Miller that's hurt over there. Jamal Williams is a guy that could come in and poach some of these touchdowns, but I really feel like Taysom Hill is the guy they like in this role. And it does seem that he's really won over Clint Kubiak like he has his previous coaches. Seems to be one of these guys that's just, probably, a gym rat, a film rat, always in the room. People seem to really like the guy. But that 401 yards rushing, Ian, that's more than a lot of tight ends are going to get receiving. And then you tack on the 7 rushing touchdowns. That's amazing. And then he did also play some tight end. He had 224 routes last year, 33 receptions for 291 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. So whenever you put all that together, I mean, you're talking about a guy with nearly 700 yards and 9 total touchdowns. And it sounds like he's going to be in a very similar role. So honestly, once the top 12 tight ends are off the board, and I would make the 12th tight end the cutoff there, Dallas Goedert. Once Dallas Goedert is off the board, I think that, Taysom Hill's in play. If you want to take Taysom Hill over Dalton Schultz, if you want to take Taysom Hill, I'm definitely taking him over like Cole Kmet, guys like that we know are now splitting tight end playing time with other guys like Gerald Everett. So looking at Taysom Hill, I do think he's a name that once the top 12 are off the board, he's a guy that we should really consider.
In 2022, tight end 13 in PPR points per game. Last year, tight end 15. So accordingly, have him ranked right around there once again. What a time to be alive. What could go wrong trusting a guy who doesn't even play tight end as such in fantasy football? Gotta love this glorious game we are dealing with here. All right, Dwayne, big news item number 2, a trade with a wide receiver, maybe not the one that everyone thought. Jahan Dotson is now a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. The Commanders sent him in a 2025 5th-round pick to Philly for a 2025 3rd-round pick and 2 2025 7th-round picks. So overall ramifications here, Dwayne, how does it impact Terry McLaurin, Luke McCaffrey, and maybe even some of these other Eagles pass catchers?
Yeah, so for Terry McLaurin, I don't think there's a big change here just because Jahan Dotson has not really been someone that's earned targets over the first 2 years of his career. So we were already really projecting McLaurin to clearly lead here. I don't think that, Dotson, his target rate, or his targets per route run, all those sort of things were so low. I just don't think it's a big impact. So McLaurin stays the same. The big opportunity here now comes for Luke McCaffrey. Right now, he's behind Olamide Zaccheaus on the depth chart. Zaccheaus is a guy that's bounced around with a few teams. He can do some nice things after the catch. He can play underneath the coverage. But I really do think a third-round pick and McCaffrey is the guy that now gets a chance to step up. Now, Luke McCaffrey has been buried. Yes, folks, he is the son of Ed McCaffrey, brother of Christian McCaffrey. He's been buried on this depth chart right now. But I do think that he's going to get the opportunity to step up, Ian, and that means that he could open up those. He could eventually step into those slot routes. He's also probably a better deep threat than Olamide Zaccheaus. Our own Thor Nystrom has talked a lot about the sneaky upside of Luke McCaffrey deeper down the field. That's something we know Jaden Daniels does really well. The other player I think we're going to see a lot more of is Dyami Brown. Dyami Brown is probably not going to be someone most of you guys are going to draft on your fantasy team unless you play in a really deep league or you're just wanting to take a swing with the last round of your best ball draft, maybe the second to last round. He's really that deep archetype. Like he's going to basically try to take the vertical. He's going to try to push the vertical, element of the field. They're going to try to get him the ball on some of these bombs. And again, Jaden Daniels is good at those. We've already seen one really good connection between those two in the preseason. So I feel like the ceiling case here for Dyami Brown, Ian, if everything went his way, might be 750 yards. And he has like a 20-yard average depth of target, right? And if it went really well, he could score 6 or 7 touchdowns. So in best ball, where you don't have to pick the weeks, I think that could be valuable. And two other just real quick names to talk about here. The closer we get, I just feel like Zach Ertz is the name that I'm just like, they haven't used him all preseason. This is a guy that did well with Cliff Kingsbury before. The last time we saw Zach Ertz last year with the Cardinals, he actually had a really good target share until they finally decided we're just going to go with our young guy and Trey McBride. We kind of have a similar situation here. And Ben Sinnott. I think Ben Sinnott's the guy we might really like later down the season, but I won't be surprised, Ian, that if people are hurting at tight end early in the season, maybe they whiffed on the guy that they took, that they were hoping might be a tight end 10 and they're looking more like a tight end 16. Because let's face it, that happens at this position. I feel like Zach Ertz might be a name that people are like, okay, I think I'm going to pick this guy up. Again, I think he probably eventually gives way to Ben Sinnott, who's I would say is the second best wide receiver on this team behind McLaurin. So if you're looking for long-term upside, it's Sinnott. But if you're just looking for a guy out of the gates, man, I don't know what your thoughts are on Ertz, but it won't surprise me like if we're looking at him as like a top 10 tight end for like 5 weeks.
Dude, I can just see the week 1 stat line now. 12 targets, 8 catches, like 35 yards and 0 touchdowns. So I would like to be able to believe
with no yak
Senate as well. Yeah, absolutely 0 yak. Not a single forced missed tackle to be found, of course, with Zach Ertz. But I will note, guys, as much as Trey McBride did finally break out last year, I mean, that rookie season, Dwain, just 39 targets in 16 games. So again, really don't have to go back that far to find the last time Cliff Kingsbury played an older Zach Ertz ahead of a promising second-round rookie. Men can dream, but again, seems like in this passing game is Terry McLaurin and everyone else. I will continue to, treat your fantasy drafts that way here moving forward. Finally, Dwayne, we did have some preseason action unfolding, and while 3 of the 4 teams were mostly using backups, we did get, I believe, 3 possessions from Anthony Richardson and the Colts starters. So first one went pretty great. He was 7 for 8. He threw a touchdown to A.D. Mitchell, looked in control of the offense, wasn't facing the Bengals starters. I get it, but it was a solid start. However, pick 6 on the next drive. On some miscommunication, I will add. It seemed like the tight end might have broke the wrong way and then didn't really get too much going on the other 2 drives. So this combined with, some pretty hilarious reporting, Dwayne, about the Bengals players really mocking Richardson, the first team offense, during some of their joint practices together, has led to Twitter naturally overreacting to every single bit of news here. Overall thoughts on Anthony Richardson, someone who regularly has been going off the board as the QB 5 and 6 in fantasy.
Yeah, so this feels like a major overreaction to me. And if you guys go look at our projections over at FantasyLife for Anthony Richardson, like we don't even have him right around 3,500 yards. We have him as a very mediocre passer. We didn't make any assumptions about him making major strides in that department. Now it could happen, but we assumed that he was a pretty raw passer in college. The small sample we saw last year was he looked like a pretty raw passer. And so we're not counting on this guy coming out and throwing for 4,500 yards. So this really feels like an overreaction. There's a reason that Anthony Richardson goes 2 to 3 rounds after Jalen Hurts. It's because we're not so sure that he can throw for 4,000 yards, right? And the whole thesis behind Anthony Richardson is the fact that he's going to run the ball. He's going to be really good when he does it. He's going to have a chance to get these tush-push opportunities. So I would say that anything that we see as far as Anthony Richardson falling in fantasy drafts, like we should just take it as a discount. It happened to us last night, Ian. We were over at Real Time Sports drafting, and we got Anthony Richardson in round 8 of a $300 draft. Now, we talked about taking him in round 7. Our roster construction dictated you have 2 flex players in this league, and we already had a tight end on our roster, so we felt we're going to have to let him go. We feel like it's a value in round 7 because he normally gets the night before he went with the second pick of round 6. So he's a guy that goes sooner, but we got him all the way back in 8. So there is some panic going on here with Anthony Richardson. And in my opinion, Ian, like this is the time to swoop. We've talked about it till we're blue in the face. If you're going to run the ball as much as Anthony Richardson is, even if you stink as a passer, you're almost a lock to be a top 8 quarterback. And if he does surprise in any way, shape, or form as a passer, he's going to blow this number out of the water, which can put him into the top 3.
Again, guys, Taysom Hill, Tim Tebow. I can't think of 2 worse passers that we've seen actually get extended appearances under center. They were top 8 quarterbacks because of that rushing. And with Richardson, what did he finish in the most, relative athletic score quarterbacks ever? First ever. Yeah, so I think he is going to be okay. Please, for the love of God, don't overreact. Because to Dwain's point, really not anything new here. We knew he wasn't going to be the most pristine passer in the world. Dwain, again, when we talk about him being QB5, QB6, I will say that's normal for touchdown passing leagues, 0.04 points per passing yards. If you do find yourself in, a 6-point passing touchdown league, then we can put Stroud. Then we can put Joe Burrow. Hey, it's a free country. You can do what you want. Our own Matthew Berry, ride or die, Kyler Murray, he is actually his QB5 ahead of Anthony Richardson. So, Dwain, I'll put you on the spot. Richardson or your boss's, favorite player, Kyler Murray, who would you rather have this year?
Well, it's kind of funny, right? Because Kyler's the name that we've been talking about as when the offseason started, we talked about Kyler really being the most underpriced quarterback. Now he's caught up with Anthony Richardson. He's right there. He's basically the next quarterback to go off the board, like if you look at like these best ball contests. So if I had to pick, I will say Kyler Murray at a lesser price than Anthony Richardson. If I was having to pick a ride or die, I would have done the same thing. And there are enough questions with Anthony Richardson as a passer that I do think Kyler Murray is a safer play in fantasy football. We've already seen Kyler Murray show us he has a 4,000-yard passing upside. Now, having said all that, Kyler Murray can't score 12, 14 rushing touchdowns. Anthony Richardson could. Are we projecting him for that? No. But would it surprise us if he becomes the tush-push version of Jalen Hurts in Indy and gets just, 7, 8 easy scores on that alone? And so, like, it's really close. I will say because of ADP, I lean to Kyler as the guy he's the guy I've drafted more than Anthony Richardson.
Fair enough. But yes, it does seem like the tush push or even just more factored in goal line rush attempts for Richardson more so on the table. As we saw last season, Jalen Hurts, 16 carries from inside the 5. Josh Allen had 14. No other quarterback had more than even 5. So yes, Kyler, yes, Lamar, they have that rushing yard ceiling, but accordingly, not 260 pounds like Richardson, don't see quite as many carries inside the 5-yard line. So those were the big 3 news items. Just a handful of other notes want to quickly run through though for you guys. Bills head coach Sean McDermott did note that MVS with a neck injury and Curtis Samuel with a toe. He feels like those two, from what he's heard, have a real good chance of being back, just not committing to it yet because it's the human body. But good note from McDermott. Hopefully, guys, fingers crossed, those Curtis Samuel bags won't be all dust too soon. Deshaun Watson is back practicing in full. Maybe people overreacted to that shoulder soreness. Certainly seems fine for now. Also, Lions All-Pro right tackle Penei Sewell suffered a rolled ankle per ESPN. No long-term issues there. So take a big sigh of relief, Detroit Lions fans. Mike Tomlin clarified that his QB depth chart has not changed. That's right. Russell Wilson still QB1 in Pittsburgh. Also, Deneric Prince started over Carson Steele in the Chiefs preseason game. However, Steele was continuing to impress. We'll see if anything changes. Again, no CEH or Pacheco, though, at the top of the depth chart. Falcons signed cornerback A.J. Terrell to a 4-year, $81 million contract extension. Wasn't that long ago that people were wondering if he was even, worthy of his, original first-round draft capital. And finally, you know what? I had a kicker trade on. I guess I'll say it now. Browns traded kicker Cade York to the Commanders. I don't know why any of us care, but that happened. So, yeah, guys, that's the news. And now a quick word on Mike's Hard Lemonade. Hey, Hey, Fantasy Life fans, let me ask you a question. Was your day hard enough for a Mike's Hard Lemonade? Are you in a slow draft that just won't end? Were you one pick away from the perfect quarterback wide receiver stack, but got sniped? Living the fantasy life is hard, and Mike's Hard Lemonade is the reward for a hard-earned thirst. Reward yourself today. Go to www.mikeshard.com. That's www.mikeshard.com to find out where you can get Mike's nearest you. Hard days deserve a hard lemonade. Dwain, people are doing home drafts this weekend. I'm doing mine today, getting on a flight to Chicago here in a couple of hours. And, it's time to go ahead and try to ruin my best friend's lives. So we got that going for us. I know you had yours last week. Again, just a freaking great time to be alive and drafting fantasy teams. So you have some great notes that we're going to get to about, again, a more round by round granular kind of fantasy strategy. But first, I wanted to go through kind of my beginner's guide because Mrs. Hartitz is joining her work league and, asked me a good question. What should I do in a fantasy draft? And so I tried to write out a quick and easy plan for someone who maybe doesn't even know what a quarterback is, maybe can't tell you exactly what to do on the football field, but their work's doing a fantasy league, so accordingly they want to try to make something happen. So quick 5-step process here, Dwayne. And my first rule is just find out how many quarterbacks your league has, because there's a million settings we can look at: tight end premium, we can look at PPR, half PPR. Again, the scoring settings and rules are never ending and can always be customized and taken advantage of. But more than anything, if you have one quarterback, guess what? You don't need to take one until at least round 3, preferably later. And if there's 2 in Superflex, Dwayne, I'm sure you've been in a Superflex draft and you tried to do the Q0, QB route for the first couple of rounds. Gets ugly in a hurry. So if you are in a league with multiple quarterbacks, make sure you have at least one after round 2, preferably 2. And by the end of your draft, you need 3.
Yeah. You got to find out for the Superflex thing. That'll be a real bummer if you don't know that it's Superflex and that you let all these you're like, man, these people are nuts. Why are all these quarterbacks going early? It'll be really bad for you because supply and demand suddenly changes when everyone has to start 2, and all of the starters will be rostered. Backup quarterbacks will be rostered in these formats. Like Justin Fields won't be on your waiver wire. So you've got to make sure that you get 2. Ideally, you're drafting 3. The second closest question I would put to this, it goes in the same bucket though, Ian, is how many wide receivers does your league start? That's the most common variation. So if you're in a league that starts 3 wide receivers, that means you might be taking a third wide receiver in round 5 or 6 that before might have been on your bench, but now they can be your starter. Most leagues have 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, but we're seeing more and more 3 wide receivers and 1 flex. The next question would be how many flex positions? So how many quarterbacks? That's key. Then how many wide receivers, and then how many flex. If you're playing in a league that's 3 wide receivers plus 2 flex, that makes you a little bit more willing. You don't have to take the elite tight end. You might be taking another wide receiver that can be in your starting lineup. You're really trying to build the best overall starting lineup that you can get. Obviously, we're going to talk about depth here in a little bit. That's really important as well. But those are the 3 key things. Quarterbacks, how many wide receivers, how many flex players.
Question number 2 that you want to, or not even question, just suggestion, I should say, as trying to go through the draft, use ADP, average draft position, as a guide, not necessarily a rule. And this is, again, pretty much just in the first 10 rounds of drafts. I'm assuming most of you are going to be looking at Yahoo, ESPN, maybe CBS drafts, where the average draft position at this point, later in August, is going to be fairly sharp, at least for those first 9 or 10 rounds. Look, I've seen Odell Beckham Jr. going like pick 120 on Yahoo, so I'm not saying it's perfect, but at a minimum, Dwayne, this isn't to suggest that ADP is perfect and going to give you, the best players. But what I do think it's pretty good at is giving you the opportunity to not reach on someone that you could have the chance to get the very next round. So again, not trying to say you need to be a slave to ADP or anything, but generally, Dwayne, inside the first 9 or 10 rounds, with the exception really being Rashee Rice and everything going on there, more times than not, I'm not trying to take someone that's more than 12 or so picks past ADP, because guess what? I can have a chance of having my cake and eating it too, getting them to fall back to us in the very next round.
Yeah, and the only caveat I would say here is, like, you guys know the league you're in. Are you in a league where it's just, mostly it's just like a bunch of friends playing together? You get together one time a year, but people don't follow football like me and Ian, like crazy fanatics, like we're crazy. We're crazy, okay?
We're crazy.
If you're in a league like that, that's just more for fun, they're probably going to follow the queue on whatever site you're drafting. Most people are going to be following that queue. You'll probably have 1 or 2 league mates that are going to have, their own source for their rankings. You guys are always going to have them because you're listening to Fantasy Life, so you're going to be ahead. But I would say looking at that queue is the way to go if you're in that kind of league. If you're in a league where it's, people that are more serious, they think about this stuff all the time, you guys are super competitive, then I'm really reading how the draft's going over the first 2 to 3 rounds, seeing if people are following the queue more often than not, or if they're clearly drafting from their own materials, ideally FantasyLife again. And once I see that, that's when I'm more willing, Ian, to throw ADP out the window. That's when I'm more willing to say, I'm in a league with 4 other sharp players. You and I did this last night. We tried to push Rashee Rice to round 4. He was like player 80 in the queue we were looking at. He went ahead of us in round 4. We were in a sharp room. So once you get into a place like that, then I kind of do throw it out the window. I know, you guys have to go watch the episode. Ian had a great live reaction. This was cinema with us being 1 pick away from Rashee Rice in round 4. But my point being is if you're in that kind of draft, you set it aside. And honestly, you start following, your tiers, and you're just basically going right down them. You don't worry about it. If it says Malik Neighbors is going to go at pick 50, and you want him in round 3 because you're in a sharp league, you take him in round 3. And then you come around, and then hopefully you get Rashee Rice in round 4, even though it says he should go in round 6. So you guys know the leagues you're playing in, and so you adapt based on that.
Again, rule number 1, find out how many quarterbacks you have. If you have 1, you don't have to draft one until at least round 3. If there's 2 or more, we are loading up a bit more early. Rule number 2, use ADP as a guide, not a rule. Now we're ready to draft. And from there, Dwayne, through the first 10 rounds, I'm trying to fill out my starting offense, the positional aspects, not saying you necessarily, again, need to be overly focusing. Please, for the love of God, do not focus on defense and special teams or kickers until the final 2 rounds of your draft. But through round 10, I would love to have 1 quarterback, 1 tight end. And at that point, that's all we need to draft because you were able to get one that was presumably priced inside the top 10 or 12 at their position. And then 2 to 4 running backs and 4 to 6 wide receivers. So, Dwayne, I think the bigger, importance here is just making sure you're not too overly invested in one single position at running back or wide receiver, and that you're not taking multiple quarterbacks and tight ends inside the first 10 rounds. Because, again, as much as this might be common sense to some of you guys, look at the draft board that Dwayne and I did last night. We had someone on a Jalen Hurts team also taking Dak Prescott, also taking 2 defense and special teams. Like, it happens. And that's in a $300 draft, let alone what could potentially be out there in some of these softer, company draft rooms. So again, through 10 rounds, I want 1 QB, I want 1 tight end, 2 to 4 running backs, 4 to 6 wide receivers. And yeah, Dwayne, I would love to pick the certain guys I feel best about. But if you're doing this, staying inside, the constructs of reasonable ADP, I think you're going to build yourself a team that at least has a chance to compete.
Yeah, for sure. And we're going to jump into how you guys should think about that in sections of the draft, rounds 1 through 3, 4 through 7, 4 through 6, and then 7 through 9 here in just a minute. But the only other caveat that I would add here, Ian, is just, again, you're reading your draft room. If you're playing in a league where you've got a lot of other sharper drafters and they're going to let quarterbacks fall, well, then you can wait a little bit longer on your quarterback. That also means you probably have to attack those running backs and wide receivers that Ian's talking about rounding out his team earlier. You might be taking a backup before you're taking an actual starter in your lineup. You could get to a point where you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I can take Tank Dell in round 6. He's fallen too far. He's going to actually be on my bench, but I should still take him over going for Kyler Murray here. That still may be the better decision because that your league mates are going to continue to wait on quarterback, and you still feel good about 2 or 3 names that you could get. So that would be my only caveat. It does really come down to what kind of league you're in, and how hardcore all the players are.
Through round 10 now, we got our quarterback, we got our tight end. We have our starting lineup pretty much filled out at this point. So what are we doing with the final 5 or 6 rounds? We are drafting handcuff running backs and young wide receivers with potentially untapped upside. So I have my, beginner's guide to drafting a fantasy football team on FantasyLife.com, and also include these names in my draft strategy article, also live today on FantasyLife.com. But again, Blake Corum, Trey Benson, Zach Charbonnet, Tyler Algier, Ty Chandler, Antonio Gibson, Rico Dowdle, Chuba Hubbard, Bucky Irving, Tank Bigsby, all these guys are going to pick 130 or later on ESPN, and all of them accordingly are going to be great bench additions, one injury away from being guys who could be, again, on the cover of your league's waiver wire manifesto the following week. And then a wide receiver, Keon Coleman, Lab McConkey, Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Leggett, Jameson Williams, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakur, and Rashid Shaheed. Yes, I slipped in Curtis Samuel as a young upside wide receiver. Okay, I'm a little bit biased on my guy Curtis, but hey, All these guys, again, regularly available in round 11 and beyond in some of these more home league heavy draft sites, and accordingly should feel pretty good about that. So rounding out your bench with those guys. And then finally, at the end of your draft, not trying to get too complicated, while you could not draft them if possible, go ahead and take your defense and special teams and take your kicker. While I do think the Raiders have a really nice opening schedule and their ADP isn't too high, Dwayne and I have actually had the opportunity to get the Eagles, the Chiefs, and even the Texans when we've been taking a DST recently. So more than anything, just try to take a defense on a good real life team. They'll have a chance to play with the lead and hopefully do some other cool stuff. And here's my entire kicker advice of 2024. Draft them from good offenses. So Dwayne, that's all I got.
No, that's perfect. Like the late round stuff. Yeah, you already mentioned the kicker and defense. You're looking for upside, guys. The only other thing I would add to it is that whatever you waited on the longest in your draft, you should be adding more of those in the late rounds, right? You're just balancing out the way you drafted. Let's say you started with 3 wide receivers for some reason, and then you come back and by round 10, you've only got 2 running backs. You should really be focused on these handcuff plays that Ian talked about, because you're going to likely need one of them to step into your lineup at some point, and you don't know which one it's going to be. So you need to have a few of them sitting on your bench. If you did the opposite and you took the running backs early, you're going to take more of the rookie wide receivers in this range. So yeah, great advice from you.
How many QBs? ADP as a guide, not necessarily as a rule. Fill out that starting offense by week 10. 1 quarterback, 1 tight end, don't need any more. Load up on handcuff RBs and young upside wide receivers late, and then take your DST and kicker last 2 rounds. I believe through that you're not going to tank your fantasy team and maybe, just maybe, win yourself a little bit of money. So yes, now we have a bit more in-depth guide we're going to get into. But first, a quick word on our friends over at DraftKings. Hey everyone, with the football season kicking off, it is the perfect time to dive into the action with our partners at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet just $5 will instantly get $250 in bonus bets, plus get 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. That's something we can all celebrate. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app today and sign up using our promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. And stay in on the action and use your $250 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. DraftKings is the place to bet on touchdowns. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager and get $250 back in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Dwayne, you've had your perfect QB strategy, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. Notes go up on FantasyLife.com. And now on this glorious Friday, you just have the perfect draft strategy overall. So love the note that you kind of brought up at the beginning where, per Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So yes, not trying to exactly go in there and say, this is exactly what you're going to do round by round by round. But really, in your just overall strategy, you know that there's 4 main strategies that are basically kind of options about to go about drafting. Hero RB, you're taking 1 inside the first, 2, maybe 3 rounds if you want to stretch your definition of a hero. Superhero RB, which is where you're taking 2 running backs inside those first 2 or 3 rounds. Zero RB, where you're not taking your first running back until round, 4 or 5, I would say, is kind of the definition there. And then heavy RB, which is where you're taking legit 3 or so running backs inside those top 4 rounds. So talk about those strategies, Dwayne, and which one you prefer more drafts than not.
Yeah, and on the Mike Tyson thing, so my thought is, why don't we just plan on getting punched in the mouth? Because is there really such a thing as the perfect draft strategy? One of the big things I see with fantasy players that causes them to unravel in their draft, Ian, is they go in with a select set of names. Now, we provide you with plenty of names. Like you said, I've already done a strategy article on every position. I've talked about who my targets are, but I try to give you a pocket of players and tell you where the ranges of value are, because what happens is players like that go in and they don't get the players that they planned on getting because someone else takes them. Last night, if we weren't ready for Rashee Rice to go 1 pick in front of us, and it can create panic, right? You go into a panic mode and suddenly you start making decisions that you shouldn't be making. You start reaching, you kind of lose control. You just get into this state where it's like fight or flight, Ian. And it happens to people really in fantasy drafts. You guys are probably laughing, but no, this thing happens where it takes over. So we want a strong, adaptable plan. And so, yes, when you talk about hero running back, that's my preferred strategy this season based on the way ADP is working on most sites with Yahoo with ESPN. This also assumes you're playing in a half PPR or you're playing in a full PPR. And right now, we're talking about 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. But you're just taking 1 running back and 2 wide receivers in those first 3 rounds, Ian. And then in rounds 4 through 6, you know that you've got to come back and think about getting 1 more running back, okay? But you don't have to. If the value falls a certain way, this is in the article. It plots out, okay, each one of these decision points you have, maybe there's 2 great wide receivers there, Malik Neighbors and Rashee Rice. And you're like, I just got to have these guys. I know one of them's now on my bench, but I want to take these receivers and I'll kind of be done with that position. You still have the flexibility to do that. But this lays it out for you in rounds of 3. And then it just helps you plot it out. So, for example, superhero, you take the 2 running backs early. You'll notice in the strategy, my preferred option in the next 2 rounds is to take 2 wide receivers right away, right? And then you can take one of the tight ends or quarterbacks. You also already got 1 wide receiver in rounds 1 through 3. And then that dictates how you need to think about rounds 7 through 9, and then so on. We've got a 0 RB build for you guys too, where you don't take any running backs early. Well, guess what you're probably doing in the next 3 rounds? You at least got to get 1 running back, maybe 2. And later in your draft, you're going to really need to pour it on at the running back position. And then the same thing. If you go heavy running back, you're going to have to do that at wide receiver.
And that really does come down to the ability to adapt as the draft comes to you. You know, how many freaking fighter philosophical notes can we bring in here? But Bruce Lee's note, be like water. Now, yes, I think Mike Tyson knocks, Bruce Lee out cold if they are, squaring off in their primes. But I do think both these pieces of advice can be applied to fantasy football. And to Dwain's point, it's more so just about making sure that you're not falling too far behind at running back versus wide receiver. See how you are addressing those positions in the early rounds, and then go from there, playing catch up at a reasonable point in the draft when you're still able to. It's always scary, Dwayne, when we're getting into, round 10, round 11, you still need your RB2, trying to avoid that when you still have time in those middle rounds. So again, Dwayne has this all mapped out on his, article at FantasyLife.com. And Dwayne, I think one of my favorite parts is some real simple do's and don'ts as you're drafting. And the first do is going to be focus on wide receiver and running back in the first 3 rounds. Again, you start seeing some of the quarterbacks and tight ends go in round 3, and we're not saying you necessarily can't take them there, but more times than not, Dwayne, especially with some of these drafts and the value we see falling, let's just keep it easy. Stick to running back and wide receiver in the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, and again, this is all based on where we think the best values are later in your draft. And those are all broken down in the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end strategy articles that I've already put out. So those go together with this guide. This guide is just an easy way to put everything together and say, okay, these are my guidelines. You're just kind of plotting it out as you go. You're playing chess, not checkers. You're thinking multiple rounds ahead. If I do this here, what do I do later? But yes, we want to focus on running back and wide receiver this year in the first 3 rounds. It may feel tempting to take Travis Kelce. It may feel tempting to take Sam Laporta. The problem is you can get Trey McBride 2 rounds later sometimes than those players. You're going to be able to get someone like Mark Andrews after they're gone. You're going to get Kyle Pitts 3 rounds later. Whereas some of the positions at running back and wide receiver, I don't feel as great about it. And remember, we need more of those. We're going to need more running backs and wide receivers. They're going to be filling out our flex spots. We might need to start 3 wide receivers depending on your league format. So you really want to make sure that you also have some good early depth at those positions. And again, it's about the value at the other positions. So really the don't rule that goes just after this, Ian, is obvious. Don't take a tight end or quarterback, in the first 3 rounds because of those values. But the next one I would say is you do want to draft one of your tight end or your quarterback in rounds 3 through 6.
Not both.
Don't try.
One.
Yeah. Don't. So the don't right after this, don't take both, especially you can sometimes make it work, Ian, if you're playing in a 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league. You can sometimes make it work. I still would prefer not to. I am typically taking the tight end in this range because I do feel there's a bigger drop off once you get past 6 at that position versus what we can do with potentially getting a Kyler Murray to fall to us. We really love Jaden Daniels. So quarterback is usually what I'm focusing on in round 7 through 9. But whenever I see drafters try to squeeze the tight end and the quarterback in that rounds 4 to 6 window, it really does become problematic for their team. So take one or the other. Take one of your quarterback or your tight end in that round 3 to 6 range. Like I said, one of my favorites to click on there is Trey McBride. Ian, I know you love Mark Andrews. We've got him together in the same tier. Those are great names in that range.
And again, let the draft come to you. If all of a sudden we see heavy, quarterbacks and tight ends going in round 3, early parts of round 4, and you have some unforeseen values at running back and wide receiver, that's okay. You don't have to be chasing these players up the board just to, again, try to fulfill these positional requirements in rounds 4 through 6. I'm with you, Dwayne. I would prefer to get one of those elite onesies, but we do have time to make up for it if we don't. We can get Jaden Daniels in round 9 or round 10. We can get Dallas Goedert a little bit later. It's more so, I would say, really you need to be addressing both of them again by around that round 10 cutoff. But at least for the elite ones, man, that round 4 to 6 range certainly superior than reaching too high in round 3. So finally, again, your last 2 of these, do focus on rounding out your running back, wide receiver, and flex in rounds 3 to 6 over here, and then beyond, of course, as well. So again, Dwayne, it's just about looking at what you did. Those first 3 picks are really going to set the stage for what you do in the rest of your draft.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. You don't have to predetermine which strategy you're going to use, okay? The one rule we've given you here is you're taking probably 2 wide receivers and a running back, or 2 running backs and a receiver in your first 3 rounds. Then depending on which one of those you do, you're now going to have an adaptation off of that as you go. But the point being that you brought up is not having to predetermine. You let the draft come to you. There could be a case, Ian, where you're sitting there and you took Christian McCaffrey, and for some reason, people are scared of Jahmyr Gibbs, and he falls all the way back to you in round 2 because they're where they see that questionable sign next to Jahmyr Gibbs' name. We see this happen. You take Jahmyr Gibbs, and then you're like, screw it, I'm going to take Achane. So there is a strategy in the article that shows you if that happens and you love the value and you want to take those 3 running backs, it's not what I would advise, but if there was ever a scenario where I would do that, that's probably it. There is a plan where I think you can still be successful, but you need to already be thinking ahead. And once you've done that, you have to say you're probably not taking any more running backs for a while, but you let the draft come to you early. You take the values. I will say taking the 1 running back and 2 wide receivers keeps you the most open, in my opinion, to not getting killed by your league mates. Essentially anything they do, you're going to be able to adapt to and still feel really good about it. But really, really, really good point from you. You don't have to lock into one of these strategies. You should know what each one means before your draft starts. You've already kind of thought through what that's going to mean. But if you don't have time to memorize all that, that's great. That's why this article is there, and it's got a nice, easy guideline.
Guys, it's called hero and superhero RB strategy for a reason. Don't be drafting them in the first 3 rounds if you do not consider them to be the potential, wait for it, league-winning assets that can, again, put up all sorts of crazy fantasy value. And to Dwayne's point, if you do go heavier RB early, you're not touching the position for a while. Last night, we took Breece Hall in round 1, Devin Achane in round 2. Dwayne, we took Jonathan Brooks in round 9 because it was a nice value. And then our next running back was round 12, gave us plenty of time to fill out wide receiver. We got our quarterback, we got our tight end, and set ourselves up for success that way. So again, a lot of talk here. Now let's put some of it into practice. That's why we're going to look at our ADP tool grid and see what to do from an early, middle, and late round draft spot. Dwayne, this is available for everyone over at FantasyLife.com. And again, I just love the way it kind of shows out. So yes, this ADP could, change depending on what you're using. Right now, we're looking at Yahoo, 8, 10, 12 team leagues. It's not going to be perfect time after time, but a general good guide here. So looking at early, Dwayne, and what we might consider doing out of a hero RB build. Again, Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, 3 of the top 5 picks off the board. Let's say, Dwayne, we are working with, pick number 4. Wind up with Breece Hall. How are you then approaching the rest of your draft?
Yeah, there's a lot of flexibility here, but coming back, you can see that you're going to have a shot at getting Chris Olave and Drake London. The other thing that you could do if you wanted to go superhero, and we'll talk about a superhero build in a minute, but like if Achane's sitting there and you want to do it, you can. Again, think about your league mates. How long are they going to stay on running backs? Are they sharp enough to know that in a PPR, they should really be drafting more wide receivers? Because you can know all these things, but if your league mates don't adapt, then the way you adapt needs to change, right? You shouldn't be drafting this like a best ball team. I'm going 0 wide receiver because it's the proof. Okay, that can actually get you beat because you're going to actually look down at one point and think, oh my God, I've got to freaking reach for Aaron Jones now in like round 5. Like, you don't want to be put into that situation. And the beauty is in these leagues, Ian, as you scroll down here, you're going to see wide receiver, there is value. there are players that fall. And Ian and I have done drafts now where we've actually seen this play out, over on Real Time Sports over the last 2 nights. You got to get your head out of best ball mode if you've been drafting best ball. I'm not saying you can't draft, a 0 running back team. But yeah, looking at this, Ian, Breece Hall, Chris Olave, Drake London. Then you could be coming back. We talked about getting that onesie. Trey McBride sitting right there for you at the end of round 4. Ian might tell you to take Mark Andrews. I'm good with either one of those. Then in round 5, coming back and getting Kenneth Walker, man, coming right around and taking him. Now you've got your 2 running backs. You've got 2 wide receivers. You've got an elite tight end. Remember, this is a league that's right now we're talking about starting 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. You got your 2 running backs, a quarterback, and a tight end. So you're looking pretty good. Then you come back and we're taking Rashee Rice well ahead of where he shows on this chart. And you guys are going to be able to pull this off in your home leagues, especially if you don't have diehard players in it. If they are,
yeah.
How early would you be willing to take Rashee Rice if you're playing with a bunch of other sharps?
Definitely 4, and if I had a couple drinks, maybe 3.
3. Ian, I think you have the best saying about Rashee Rice. Like, he is the one name when he goes off the board in any fantasy draft. Everyone, you just go, great pick, best pick of the draft, best value of the draft. So I've got Rashee Rice at round 6 here.
I've not seen him go one time where I hate it. So it's a great point there, Dwayne, because you see him on a lot of these sites, 80, 90 ADP. And no, do not wait that long, but you can try to, again, thread that middle if possible. So, Dwayne, in your article, I believe you do actually go ahead and list out. Here is a hero RB build. Breece Hall, Chris Olave, Drake London, Trey McBride, Kenny Walker, Rashee Rice, Roma Dunze, round 8. I know your favorite quarterback, just in terms of value, Jaden Daniels. And then even someone like Tajay Spears. You're leaving the first 9 rounds with 3 running backs. You got 4 wide receivers. You got a quarterback and tight end. And then guess what? You can do what we talked about earlier. Fill out the rest of the roster with handcuff running backs and young upside wide receivers.
Yeah, and a lot of little micro adaptations as far as the players that you want to target there. If you've got some people you like better, still go check out the ADP tool over at Fantasy Life. Pull up this grid view for Yahoo, and you can kind of plot what that looks like. Maybe you don't like Chris Olave. I think Chris Olave has wide receiver 1 traits, but maybe you just don't like Derek Carr and you don't like, the Saints offense overall. Great. There are other options you could go with. You could think about just going ahead and taking Nico Collins in round 2 if you like the Texans offense better, or you just take Drake London in round 2 and then turn around and come back for Nico Collins. So you guys can still interchange these things with like the players you like more and have a similar roster build.
And guess what? As you can see on here, people will start taking kickers and defense and special teams around round 10 sometimes, man. It happens in high-stakes leagues. It happens in home leagues. This is a real problem that affects households all across continental America, Dwayne. And guess what? You guys aren't going to let that happen because you are going to, please, for the love of God, just wait until the last 2 rounds. And that is the last time I will harp on that point to you all. So, Dwayne, let's talk about middle position now, which really does give you, I think, a better chance of getting that superhero RB build with 2 inside of the first 3 rounds. But again, you want to make them the right running back. So let's say we're drafting from, again, 106 right there. Not a guarantee you're going to get Bijan or Breece to fall to you, but if you do, Dwayne, really tough to say no to them there.
Yeah, and there's going to be a good chance one of them can fall to you there. Like it's showing that they're gone here, but remember these ADP, there's bands on these things. These guys are going in ranges. So if you get to pick 6 and you've got Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson on the board, I'm taking them in these formats, right? I think you can make a different argument for best ball or whatever, but in these formats, I'm taking them. And then coming back in round 2, you can see there's a few names here, Ian. We obviously love Achane, but I think Isaiah Pacheco is in the mix here. I think Kyron Williams is in the mix here in these types of leagues. And then you're suddenly sitting there and you're like, okay, I feel really good about my running backs. I don't have to worry about people taking Joe Mixon in round 3. I don't want to. The big part of thinking about these running backs in rounds 1 and 2 here, Ian, is starting to look at the running backs that go in rounds 3 and 4 that I really don't want to take. And my list narrows down very quickly. We named Kenneth Walker earlier. He's one of my absolute targets in the middle rounds if you don't take running backs early. But there's not a huge list of them. Like we like James Conner as well, but there's also a lot of guys that we want to be avoiding for how early they're going in these Yahoo drafts. So I kind of like getting to, and I used to never do this, but based on the way leagues are working this year, I don't mind getting the 2 running backs out of the gate and then circling back to wide receiver. My son did it last weekend. It's now a famous tweet, guys. You can go check it out. Like, it's still getting, it's weird. Like, I open my timeline in the morning and it's still like the thing getting the most likes. He plays in on ESPN, full PPR. I mean, he starts off with Christian McCaffrey. He was early, but he got Derrick Henry and he got Marvin Harris, and he still comes back and gets Malik Neighbors, still gets Jalen Waddle, still had Tank Dell. Some of these things, people taking 2 quarterbacks, taking 2 tight ends, all these things you're talking about, these weird things that start happening in leagues, Ian. But the point being is, don't totally shut yourself off to this being a strategy that can work. He did it and absolutely destroyed it and didn't have to worry about coming back and reaching for those running backs we really don't want to be taking in the middle rounds. So that's the key to it. And then look at this. Look at the build you could still have, Ian, in a superhero. You could still come back round 3, Nico Collins, round 4, Jalen Waddle, round 5, freaking Malik Neighbors. Are you guys kidding me? You can go with 2 really good running backs and still get those 3 wide receivers. Yes, what did we give up here? We didn't get Trey McBride. We did not get Mark Andrews. We bypassed them to put Malik Neighbors into our flex spot, and I think that's the right move, to be honest. And so you settled for Evan Ingram. I don't like Evan Ingram as much as those other names, but if I get to have the 2 starting running backs in and I get Malik Neighbors as my flex, I'm okay with Evan Ingram. It's a trade-off. We can't have everything. And who knows, maybe in your draft, somebody just does something silly and lets a Kyle Pitts or someone else you like more than Evan Ingram fall back to you in round 6. I mean, we've seen weirder things. And then you're just rounding it out. Jaden Daniels is on every list, Ian. So, I mean, he's just I'm not saying you guys have to be all in on Jaden Daniels. He is, Ian, like you said, Ian, he's just the most value. He's a dual threat quarterback that's just, it's a cheat code in fantasy, and he's the last one on the board. You get him after the others. You see me working in a Deontay Johnson here. So I actually took 4 wide receivers from rounds 3 to 7. Because why? I took 2 running backs early. I'm going to lay off of running back now. That doesn't mean if there's a running back you like that's a value that's there that maybe you like more than Deontay Johnson, you can interchange that. You could take the running back there. Here, I came back and circled back. I think the sweet spot in these drafts for coming back to running backs, if you start with 2, really starts in round 8 and 9.
I think the 3 wide receivers that help make the superhero RB starts that much easier based on the ESPN Yahoo ADP are Malik Neighbors, Rashee Rice, and then also Jalen Waddle, who inexplicably is usually available in round 5. So really use that value, proposition in the middle parts of your fantasy drafts to, again, make those superhero RB starts work. So, Dwain, would these running backs constitute superhero status for you? Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Devin Achane, Kyren Williams, Derrick Henry, Isaiah Pacheco. Is that where we're drawing the line, or would you also include Travis Etienne and Josh Jacobs in there?
No, I would not include Etienne and Jacobs in that group. And I think Pacheco's even a slight question. And I think Barkley's a slight question, because where Barkley goes, you're having to take him at the end of round 1 and then turn it around and put him with another run. I don't like that combo as much. I like the wide receivers going at the end of round 1. So for me, it's really CMC, Bijan, and Breece coming back in round 2. If you're picking from earlier middle position, then I think the names are Achane and Kyren Williams are my 2 favorite that are likely to be there. And then it's Pacheco, Derrick Henry. I'm not forcing those, but I would agree. I would be willing to do the superhero with those 2 names as well.
Going to round things out, guys, with a look at the later round position. And again, if your draft falls the way it falls, then fantastic. Maybe you can start superhero down here as well. As we can see with the ADP grid, Jonathan Taylor and Kyren Williams out of the 9 spot. That's not bad. I probably, I'm taking A.J. Brown or Garrett Wilson ahead of Jonathan Taylor, but you're getting your 2 baller running backs. I don't, completely despise it, but more drafts than not, Dwain, when we have a chance at getting a Sun God and A.J.B. or Garrett Wilson, give me those guys, because still some good running backs that we can get to start that hero build in RB, get that hero build in round 2 and then go from there.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is a spot where I want the wide receivers, especially in PPR and half PPR. Obviously, you guys are playing standard. That changes the whole thing. We've got rankings set up for you guys where we look at standard. So if you're playing in that sort of league, running backs obviously move up the board. But in these half PPR and PPR formats, man, I want one of Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown, and Puka Nacua right here. And I'll be honest, this is the spot, if I were to do it, that I am the most willing in to go 0 running back, because you can get Garrett Wilson and Puka Nacua. You can get potentially A.J. Brown and Garrett Wilson. Like, when those combos stare me in the face, that's where I'm willing to go with it. Now, you got to look down the board and decide, where are you making the gross pick at running back that you're probably not going to like? Is it round 3 Joe Mixon? Is it, you can scroll down a little bit more. I mean, is it Rashad? Is it beginning of round 4? That's really gross as well. Rashad White. Like, I like those players are fine in round 5 or 6. I don't want them in rounds 3 or 4. So you got to start thinking through that, and it gets pretty tricky. And then you're going to be sitting there. The challenge with that strategy, Ian, is now you're sitting there and you're like, oh man, I've already got 3 wide receivers, and here's Malik Neighbors, and he's still sitting here. Or I could take Ramondre Stevenson. You know what I mean? So it gets kind of sticky. So I still like going with the hero. I just wanted to point out, I'm the most willing to go 0 running back there, but you guys need to understand the ramifications of the decisions that you make in your life. And it can be pretty tough at running back. So yeah, let's go with a hero build here and show the people what they could be looking at. And the one that I laid out in the articles is sorry, not Breece Hall. If you get Breece Hall at the end of there, like you're looking really great. But it was Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs coming back with Cooper Kupp, then Jalen Waddle. So you've got 3 wide receivers, 1 running back after 4 rounds. Getting Dalton Kincaid as your elite tight end. Notice we only have 1 running back still here, guys, based on the way the board's falling. And we push it again with Malik Neighbors. Come back in round 7, we get Tony Pollard. Of course, Jaden Daniels is on your team, and then Chase Brown with Jaden Daniels. Chase Daniel has the best job in the league, holding that clipboard, making all that money. But Chase Brown, obviously, and there's a lot of other names, guys. Go check out the running back strategy article. I give you a big group of players similar to Chase Brown of that archetype.
Again, so much goodness in this article from Dwain. And again, guys, just trying to set you up in the first 9 or 10 rounds, because after that, things get wild. There are only so many Puka Nakuas and Kyron Williams, every decade, let alone every season. So I hope you nail your sleepers in your late round picks. And yeah, go ahead and take your guys at that point in the draft. But again, the more you can set up your roster in those first 9, 10 rounds, as Dwain lays out here, check it out on FantasyLife.com. The better chance I believe you will have to ace that draft and, more importantly, get those bragging rights over your friends and family. So appreciate you guys tuning in as always. Best of luck to you this weekend and beyond. Go freaking bring home some fantasy football hardware. It is a great day to be great after all. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.